Today I have the honor of introducing a man that you guys know as an investigative journalist, as a documentary filmmaker, as the organizer of the People's Reset, as a writer, as an activist, and as a community organizer. And I have the absolute honor and pleasure of knowing him as the most loving partner, as the most caring uncle, as the most loving dad, right? Yeah. As the most incredible son to his mother, and as the most incredible brother to my sister and his siblings, and so much more. And it is such a blessing to get to know him this deeply and to be this close to him. And I know that through him sharing his story and everything that he's going to share with you, that you guys are going to get to know him a little bit more today. And I'm so excited for you. Please help me welcome Derrick Broze.
All right, it's my turn. Now I get to share some stuff. I'm probably going to be the third deeply personal story here. Mine does relate to parallel systems, though, I promise. I feel like this year there's a theme with certain speakers under all the themes. Like, there's a lot of shit to release. There's a lot of stuff that needs to come out over the last year. And that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about. For those who don't know, I just released a new book last month. It's my memoir. It's called A Man of My Word, How I Overcame Addiction, Depression, and Mental and Physical Prisons. If you want to learn more about it, you can go to amanofmyword.com. And everything I'm going to be speaking is going to be coming from this book or related to this book. My talk is about how to build a parallel path for addiction, a parallel path to the AA, 12-step, and generally like the mainstream way that people tend to deal with addiction. And I'm going to explain why I think this is relevant. You know, some of you might be thinking, how does this relate to building freedom, creating stronger communities? But as I'm going to share, I believe that if we don't deal with those other traumas, which are the root of the reason people use drugs or get sucked into porn or gambling or alcohol or any other sort of thing that can become habitual and then what we would call an addiction, that there is always a root cause, a root trauma, something that needs to be healed or worked on or at least addressed and then learned to love underneath that addiction. And I speak, of course, from experience. And this is largely why I started a website and started doing the work that I do and calling it the conscious resistance, because I've always believed that the building of a more free world, it's not just about how many gardens we can build and how many seeds we can save and how many guns you can have and how much, you know, end of days supplies you can have. Sure, that's valuable. Do those things, have that sort of security and comfort. But there's also, and it's not even just about going to confront the government or the corporations or to, you know, focus only on the physical realm. There's always that internal realm, the spiritual realm, psychological, mental, however you want to think about that. And so to me, the conscious resistance has always been the bringing together of these two worlds. Until we address what I call the internal tyrant, our doubts, fears, insecurities, and limiting beliefs, it ultimately doesn't matter what we do in the physical realm, and vice versa. If we only do the internal work and only focus on the healing, like some in the spiritual crowd where they're just floating above all of us, just in perfect bliss, and anytime you try to bring up something about, did you see what ICE is doing? Have you heard about what's happening in Gaza? They say, no bad vibes here, only good vibes here. Or they say, well, it's all 5D chess because the Galactic Federation's coming to save us and there's really nothing I need to do about it, so I'll see you at yoga. There's that too. There's all these ways that people sort of aren't dealing with it, whether it's, again, focused only on the physical realm and ignoring the internal world or vice versa. But it's, to me, the conscious resistance is the bringing together of those two things. So that's always been a focus of my work. And again, it comes from my own personal experience. And if you've heard me speak, you may have heard some version of me sharing about my story, my general story of getting addicted to drugs at 20 years old, going to prison, discovering, you know, meditation and prayer, doing a lot of internal healing, and then getting into journalism. And that's the story that is in this book. This book doesn't talk about any of my activism or journalism. It ends at the beginning of that. This is like the prequel to everything that you guys mostly know me for. But today I'd like to share the full story, if I could, with you guys. And we're going to get to the reason I share this story is because I want you to understand that I can speak from direct experience once I propose certain solutions to you that I think are necessary. Because again, back to my point of what does this mean? What does this relate to freedom? every time I've shared this story for the last 12 years that I've been doing public speaking, whether that was in Houston, Texas, where I'm originally from, or in the US, or in the UK, or anywhere, every time I share my story, even briefly, about having been addicted to drugs and dealing with depression and self-harm, somebody will come up to me, often a mother, but also sometimes a son or a daughter or a father, and say, my son's addicted to drugs right now, or I lost my daughter to addiction, or my father's in a rehab, or I used to be addicted, or I've never touched drugs in my life, but this is the way that I'm struggling. This is the addiction that I have, or the thing that I have. And so even in our conscious, freedom, spiritual, enlightened spaces, there's still a lot of trauma here, right? I mean, I think we all probably run into it occasionally in our own movements, like, wow, I thought we were all heading in a different direction and these people are still doing these same traits. Well, it's because even though we might have those intentions and that knowledge and that feeling and understanding that we want to build a better world, if we don't do that internal work, there's still things that are going to come up, right? And it's not that we're ever going to be perfect, but ultimately these things, until they're dealt with, they will continue to show themselves. So for me, if we, as the people who are aware, one, there's a problem in the world, things are not functioning as we believe they could, and two, we want to do something about it, right? Because you guys came here for solutions, right? Not just to hear about how bad the world is, but to try to see what can we do for those coming 7 generations, right? What can we do for the young ones that are here, the ones that are out there playing in the field, joyful, blissfully unaware to the things that all of us know about the current world, right? And shout out to all the parents, because that terrifies me. I'm like, damn, can I really do it? There's like digital IDs about to happen. What will I tell them? Son, just 10 years ago, there was freedom. I'm sorry you came into this world and it's not there anymore. It's like, that's a scary thought to me. So shout out to those who are brave enough to do that at this moment. That's what it's really about, though, is those coming generations. So if we're the ones that understand there's a problem, we understand that we want to do something about it, then part of that, I believe, should be an effort to heal and empower ourselves and heal our wounds and our traumas as much as humanly possible. Because by doing that, as well as building decentralized tech stacks and permaculture gardens and all these other things that we highlight here at this event, we will be participating in the building of the better world. Does that make sense? I remember I did a podcast back in 2013. It was called For the Good of Everyone, Focus on Yourself. And that's kind of the message, right? I mean, really, if we put more energy into that, I think we'd all be better off. So that's why I want to share my story with you, and just in its raw, gritty nature and all of it. And why I think we need alternatives to those systems. Because if there are people within our freedom communities who are addicted and it's secret and it's kind of quiet, because, I've been to some conscious events and they might have like an AA or sober circle for people who want to come to things like this, but then are intimidated when the meetup's at the bar or when everybody's smoking weed or whatever. And those people feel like, oh, I can't come to that because I have this potential addiction or because I might relapse or whatever, right? That still exists even if we're not talking about it here, whether it's drugs or other things. And so I just want to kind of create space for that. If anybody else is struggling that or has struggled in that way, like by a show of hands, who knows somebody who has been addicted to drugs or alcohol? Everybody in this room, right? It's a lot more prominent than maybe we want to talk about. And I can speak from experience that is a stigma that when I share my story of like, yeah, I was addicted to crystal meth. I lived in a crack and meth house for about 2 or 3 months until I hit rock bottom and I decided to change my life. And I smoked weed to stop smoking meth. And then I got sober. I see the look in people's faces like I should be, like they're embarrassed for me. Or like, oh, crystal meth? And I'm like, I'm okay. Are you all right? Because I'm fine. Like, this was 20 years ago and I'm okay talking about it. Are you going to be okay? But because I can see that there's still a stigma. There's like we have to talk about it quietly. Like, no, I was addicted to crystal meth. I was hooked on Xanax. I was the drunk puking everywhere at every party. And I was doing those things, not necessarily consciously at the time, but now I can look back and see clear as day that I was definitely self-medicating and I was avoiding a lot of things. So it's more prominent than we realize and we need to talk about it. So I was arrested 20 years ago, November 16, 2005. Literally just 2 months ago, the 20th anniversary passed of my arrest, which changed my whole life. And again, that's the story that's in this book. The book starts on the day I was arrested. And I was arrested at 20 years old, 2 weeks to 21. And I'd spent the previous 2.5 years bouncing from one substance to the other, from one intense chaotic relationship to the other, and doing a lot of damage to my body, to my mind, both through alcohol and drugs, but also physically through cutting myself and things of that sort. And it was only when I got arrested And I found myself being sentenced to a 2-year felony sentence and probation and to this Texas State institution, essentially a prison that they call a rehab. And I'll talk more about why I think these things are a scam. And it was only when I hit that bottom and when I realized that I had exhausted every option, there was nothing that my mother, my lawyer, my girlfriend, anybody could do at the time. I could sit on the expensive jail phone and cry to them all day long, and there was nothing that anybody could do to get me out of those four walls until they decided they were going to call my name and let me out of there. And that space of feeling like what is a very disempowering feeling was actually where I started to find my power, if that makes sense. When I finally felt like, okay, there's nothing I can do. Like I can't hide. You go to these places and there's sort of like a cliche that you can become a better criminal when you get locked up. It's very true because I'm in there for selling and using drugs, right? But I'm meeting identity thieves. I'm meeting people who are carjackers and who break into houses. And if you want to get a better criminal, you're like, okay, let's meet up when we get out. Let's team up. But like that's definitely happening. And unfortunately, that was sort of what I did, not getting further into other crimes, but just getting back into drug dealing after I got out. And in that space, though, when I found myself just like, I'm here. I have to figure out why I'm here. I really started journaling. That's probably what saved my life, is I started journaling every day. And I had been only a couple weeks sober off crystal meth at this time. And so obviously the more time I'm behind bars, I'm getting more back to normal after 2.5 years of just constant drug use. And I don't mean like I did a line of coke once at the club. I mean like doing coke and meth together and taking 10 hits of acid and drinking 30 shots of tequila till I'm puking everywhere and do it, all those fun stories are in there. And so I mean like a very intense, chaotic, not like we're having a good time, even though I guess I thought I was at some points. And so as I'm coming off of that and I'm behind bars and I have no other choice but to face the facts that this is where I'm at. I'm looking at the calendar. It's late November and the earliest I'm going home is next September. And just having to face that. And the hardest part was that I'd grown up in a family with drugs and alcohol prominently everywhere. I'd grown up visiting my father in prison. My earliest memories as a child are being 5 years old and visiting him in prison and wondering why we're going to this building with giant razor wire and why they're saying that my mom has to go back to the car to change her shirt because it's too revealing, or why we only get to see my father for 2 hours, or why he has a black eye, or all these kind of things, and why we have to leave. And so many of these things that it's not anybody's fault or anything. I don't think my mom had the tools that were probably necessary to kind of help me navigate that, me and my brother and sister. And for me as a kid, I kind of internalized a lot of that. I started to just think maybe there was something wrong with me. It's a kind of, in a way, I think a story that isn't new to many of us, that children are traumatized at a young age from such a confusing, hurtful experience. My father coming in and out of my life, making promises to be there for birthdays, for Christmas, things like that, writing letters and sending Christmas cards, and then showing up one time out of the blue, taking us to the park. It's being the time of our life. And then the week later, my mom's like, he's back in prison. I'm sorry, guys. He's not going to be around. And then a couple of years later, showing up and that whole game. And so that led to me being a very depressed little kid at a young age. And I mean, by 7 years old, I was suicidal. I mean, at 8 years old, starting to like play with knives in a way of like, I don't know, trying to see how much pain I could take, or I really can't even explain what I was doing. I just remember these things and experiencing that. But it was also a time of just being extremely sad. And then I remember 7 years old. It's interesting that in my life, a lot of my major events have happened in chapters of 7. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody else, but this memory that I'm going to share now, and as I said, I got arrested about a week and a half before I turned 21. I was 7 years old, and I remember this is such a clear memory. I remember being in the driveway, in the garage, the door's open, and the door to the house is over here, and my mom keeps coming in and out. I'm 7 years old in a little blue and white baseball uniform, just, watching the street. And my mom keeps coming in and saying, we have to go. And then, I'm just like, just a couple more minutes. And eventually we have to go. And obviously I was waiting for my father. He was out this time. He was supposed to be showing up for some baseball game. He'd got out of prison. He never showed. And I remember clear as day how that felt. Then this sadness continued essentially till I turned 14 years old. And another strong memory that I recall, being at my grandmother's for Christmas. Every year, the Broze family gets together for Christmas Eve, and my father had just been released the latest time from prison. And him and his father, my grandfather, were ready to actually try to reconcile things. They had their own history of messed up things since before I was born. In fact, it was my grandfather who got my father into drugs at 14 years old, at a very young age. So they had their own trauma and their own things. My grandpa moved on with his life, became a successful business person, but his son never did. He just kept going in and out of prison. So they had all this stuff, and it was going to be a big Christmas. He's going to be there at Grandpa's house. Everybody's going to be there. And I remember walking in, I'm 14. It felt like the entire world depended on this moment, because I think I was really starting to crack as a young kid, and I was already starting to get into trouble. And, I was the wannabe, almost could have been school shooter, no lie. I got suspended from school for a hit list in 7th grade. I got suspended and arrested for saying I was going to burn the school down in 8th grade. Like, I was headed in a bad direction because of all this stuff I was dealing with. And I remember being 14, we walk there, show up at grandma's, the door opens up and my father's not there. Immediately that felt like something was wrong. And I could just sense in the air that things were just not right. And I'm looking around, okay, I don't see him anywhere. Heart's starting to beat, feeling a little bit of anxiety in my chest. Is he here? Is he here? I decided to walk to the bathroom, and I hear my grandma telling my mom that he's already been arrested. He's already on the way back. And I remember going to that bathroom, slamming the door behind me, and just crying my eyes out for several minutes. And then in that moment, I said, fuck this. I'm never going to let anybody hurt me again. And I put this shell around me like I'd never felt before. What I thought was strength, which was really just me masking all this pain with anger. And that's the point that I started to get further arrested into schools, getting fights. I was in all advanced classes. I graduated high school early, a semester early than all my friends, went into college, but I was known as the crazy kid. I was the one throwing chairs at teachers, getting arrested, getting in fights. I was lashing out, trying to deal with all this stuff. And also I kind of developed into the class clown. I was, in my own world, but I noticed that when I acted silly or crazy, those cool kids seemed to like me and want to hang out with me, right? And so I started to become just like a crash dummy for other people. I really had no sense of self yet because I didn't like whatever I felt. It felt like, again, maybe it was my fault my father was there. Then it was like, fuck him, I don't need anybody, I don't need anything. I used to love the word misanthropic, like the hatred of humanity, like hating people. Like that was a feeling that I identified with for a long time, or at least I believed I did. And then as I said, I graduated early. I got into drugs pretty much immediately, started drinking all the time. First time I ever got drunk, thanks to my brother. I took 21 shots of tequila. I ended up rolling around the floor naked everywhere. They videotaped the whole thing, and then they'd pop the VHS tape into the player every time people came over. Big, hey, look what Derrick did last time we got drunk. That was the first time I ever got drunk. But that was an example of how I did things. If you want me to do something, all right, well, I'm doing 20 beer bongs, not just one. What do you mean? Acid? Sure, give me 10. Let's do some lines. Let's do even bigger ones. Like, that's just where my life went for 2 years. And eventually, after going from alcohol to Xanax to taking ecstasy all the time till I was a zombie, and then, one thing after the other, I eventually tried crystal in January 2005, and then within 10 months, I was locked up. Within 5 months, I was on the street. Within 2 months, I lost my job, lost my apartment, and the relationship I was in at the time. And there's so much more to this, but this is just an example of what my bottom looked like. And yeah, and then eventually I did get myself sober. I was able to actually, when I was living in this crack meth house, it was an attempt to try to change my life. And one of the guys I was friends with at the time, I said, I'm really tired of this. I don't think I'm happy. Like, let's get a place, let's get a job, let's really figure this out. And he was like, yeah, let's do it. He said he was committed to the same thing. He tells me he finds an apartment we can both move into. I'm like, awesome. This is going to be a fresh start. This is late summer 2005. I'm like, finally, 2 crazy years. Like, I'm going to get my shit together. And then, he takes me to see the apartment. And, oh, by the way, he mentions we got 3 months, six months free rent because it turns out the managers are crackheads. So I got them some crack and they gave us 6 months free rent. I'm like, okay, that's a kind of weird start. But all right, I guess a new place is a new place. Turns out the whole apartment complex is infested with crack. And as soon as we moved in, just as you can imagine, turned into I'm like Harry Potter sleeping in the room under the stairs, tripping, listening to Pink Floyd all the time, like, oh my God, this is not where I'm supposed to be. And eventually I found the strength to just say, like, at least these people respected me enough to not offer me anything when I said, like, I'm really trying to get out of this. Please don't offer me anything because I will say yes. And again, I do credit cannabis for helping me. I remember sitting in the corner of this crazy house, just smoking cannabis out of a bong for day 1. Okay, I didn't do meth or do anything. Cool. Day 2, day 3. By day 8, day 9, I was able to just get up and leave. I mean, my car had been outside the whole time, but I didn't have the strength to leave, and I'd burned so many bridges that I had nowhere to go. But eventually I got through that. I left, went back to my parents' house, and my mom's house, and I did try to get myself right, but I was still struggling after starting to get sober, struggling to get a job because I couldn't take a drug test from smoking weed. And I decided to do what I'd learned to do over the last 2 years, which was sell drugs. And I went and did one more deal, and that one more deal is what got me arrested on November 16th, 2005, which I believe 100% everything happens for a reason, so I don't regret a moment of it because it's what put me here with you guys right now. Okay. So, as I said, I get locked up, and we're going to get to the solution in just a moment, but I want to share a little bit of how I got into what you guys know me as. So after getting locked up, and as I said, I start to sort of reflect and see this path that I just described of like, wow, I've been dealing with some intense trauma the way through there. And as I said earlier, with kind of toying with suicidal ideation as a young kid, I started cutting myself. This tattoo covers up the biggest scar that I had on my body, where I hacked myself 3 times. I blacked out, and I don't remember doing it, but it involved 20 stitches, and it was very bad. And I talk about that in there. And there were things like that I was doing, and I just, like I said, I didn't have the tools to process all this stuff. And also, for some reason, I just couldn't quite get it that maybe sticking all these drugs up my nose was making things more confusing. I just felt like I'm in such an emotional mess. Oh, okay. Now how can I figure this out? It wasn't working out very well. And yeah, eventually after getting locked up, I had that space. I don't want anybody to come away thinking that I'm crediting the prison system with helping me in any kind of way, because these places are horrible institutions. And I'm speaking of the United States specifically, which is the largest, prison population in the world. And these places are not about rehabilitation. They're not about actually trying to help people come back into society a better person, which is all, it's the kind of bullshit that people tell themselves about the prison system. That's the Disney version of events we were sold. Well, bad people do things, we send them to jail or prison, they're going to be rehabilitated, and they come back into society. And we all know that that's bullshit, because for one, there's no sort of care or anything to try to help people on an individual level. It's just like, okay, you got caught with drugs, go in there with the guy who tried to kill somebody. You got caught with, stealing into someone's car, go in there with the guy who has a completely different problem. And there's no effort to actually try to do treatment. So I don't want anybody to think that my story is a credit to the prison system in any way. I met so many brilliant minds, and many of them are still wasting away in there. Could be doing much better out here in the world, and it's for garbage reasons. I'm not talking about people who are violent and truly have some of their own issues to work through, but people who got caught up into drugs or caught up into some other circumstances, and because the system's rigged against them in a lot of ways, they find themselves in prison. And then once you're in that system, trying to get out is a whole nother thing, because the other aspect, besides the way the system's built, so many of us, and I would hate to think anybody in this room, but definitely the majority of the population, let's say, still has a stigma around felons and ex-cons and people like that. And we have a very big forgiveness problem. And and like, we want people to be rehabilitated, go into prison, do your time, come back out and be a better person. But I don't want to be around you. I'm going to judge you, and this is something I dealt with, and thankfully I don't have to really deal with it because of the life that I've created for myself. But the vast majority of felons can't get job many places, can't get rented many places. And back in Houston, where I'm originally from, I mean, we were having to go to shittier and shittier neighborhoods for me to find somewhere that would be willing to rent to me as a felon with a nonviolent charge from 20 years ago. So it's very much a factor, and it's another thing that people have to overcome. So there's all these different things wrong with that system, and I'm going to get more into that and why I don't think that system's the answer. But when I was in that space, despite it being part of the prison system, I did use that time to start journaling, to start doing my own internal healing, to start meditating, to start praying, and really open myself up in a way that I never had before. Because before that, I had always been, and I still am, anti-religious, but not just anti-religious. I was anti-God. I was anti anything that was beyond the 5 senses, because to me, it just felt like there's no way my life could have been as crazy as it was, and somebody is just watching me, suffer. It was just a concept I had a really hard time with, and so I didn't have any openness to that. But then once I found myself locked up and in that feeling of powerlessness, of knowing I wasn't going anywhere until they called my name, I was like, I got to do something. I have to figure this out. I've been mad my whole life at this guy, my father, for being in and out of prison, and here I am getting arrested for the same thing, for drug charges. How the hell did I get here? I knew enough to know that wasn't the road I was going to go on. So I really started doing my spiritual work and my healing journey, and I'll tell you guys more about that in a moment. But I I did get out eventually. And as I said, I got out on parole and I dealt with all that system. I also dealt with racism and violence, and most of it's just fear in all these institutions. It all comes back to fear because of people being put into a dehumanizing situation. But through all of that, I just tried to focus and know that I needed to get some healing. I remember there was nights when I was starting to meditate, thanks to my grandmother, my grandmother was one of my hugest spiritual influences in my life, and she passed away just a couple of years ago. And she was sending me books on what's called centering prayer, which is kind of like a Christian meditation by Father Thomas Keating, and Zen Buddhism. And it was my first real introductions into these things. And so Granny's sending me these things in jail, in prison, and I'm just starting to like, all right, I guess tonight I'm going to do this cross-legged thing they're describing in this book. I don't have a YouTube video to watch or some local Zen master. I'm just trying to figure this out. And I could hear people like, what the fuck is that guy doing over there? You see what he's doing? And I'm just like, just stay in the zone. This is just for me, forget these people. And I learned in that space. That space is filled with fear and doubt and anger and all these things. And I think that was what was so vital for me, is that it was such a dark place to be, but that was the only thing that was keeping me sane, that and journaling and working on these things. And so eventually I do get out after bouncing in and out a couple times. I did a year, got out, lasted 5 months before I went back. And I did that whole game till I was finally released October 2008, got off parole June 2009, started watching conspiracy documentaries in late 2009, and the rest is history. And I've been here since then. But it started with that journey. I don't know if I hadn't gone through that low and hitting rock bottom, if I wouldn't have woken up and started to care not only about myself, because that's really what I was lacking. I had no sense of self-worth. I had no sense of self-love. And because of that, the idea that I should care about the world and whatever's going on with the government or the environment or any of these issues, it was just like, what do you mean? I'm just trying to live through the day. And that's when it kind of dawned on me that if we have people, as I started to wake up, I was realizing how important that is. If we have people in this planet who are suffering from their own traumas and their own different things that they're not dealing with, it's going to be, I believe, much harder for them to even give time and energy to these other causes that we're saying, hey, pay attention to this thing. I'm worried about this thing happening. Well, if somebody can't even imagine waking up the next day, if they're barely making it through there, it's kind of hard to put extra energy into carrying outside the world. Sometimes you can do that. Sometimes you can kind of ignore yourself and put that energy outwards, but eventually those things will surface. And so as I was having this wake up journey, I realized, okay, that's got to be a part of the puzzle. And so for the last 16 years, as I've been doing journalism and documentaries and interviews and all the stuff that many of you have seen my work for, I've talked about these things. I sprinkle into my message, but this book and really this event and this year is the first that I'm really trying to make addiction and healing the root cause of trauma a more focal point of my work. I won't stop doing journalism and documentaries and things like that, but I think this is just as important of a cause, because again, I think if our brothers and sisters are out there suffering from their own addictions and their own traumas, then how are they going to be able to join us here and hear the language that we're speaking, inviting them to these kind of events where they could get the healing that they really needed? Who was here last night and got that healing, felt that healing on the dance stage? Thanks to Miss Natalie Rise back there. That's the kind of healing we need for everybody. But if they're not even able to, again, find that self, because each of you, whether you recognize it or not, we've all got our own doubts, fears, and insecurities. And I'm sure you, like me, still occasionally might struggle with a sense of self-worth sometimes, or maybe just not feel good in your body or things like that. There's all sorts of things we deal with, but you value yourself enough to at least have made the effort to be here right now. You realize that you deserve this healing. You deserve this experience, this activation, right? We need all our brothers and sisters at home and around the world to recognize that and feel that same thing. So I want to focus in the coming years more and more on how we can help those people who are dealing with those things. As I said earlier, every time I share this story, somebody will come up to me and tell me their horror story of their loved one that is currently, addicted to this thing or this thing. And I lost several good friends to drug addiction. I want to tell you one last story before I propose to you what I think are some potential parallel alternative paths to the AA 12-step addiction is a disease model, which personally I don't find helpful. No offense to anybody who does. I do have friends who found a lot of value in AA and 12-step. I did not, and I'll share about that in a moment. But when I first got locked up, I decided to write my father a letter and basically tell him who I was as an adult. After that 14-year-old experience, I hadn't seen him at all, and then here I am 7 years later thinking I'm an adult at, 21, and I'm locked up. So I decided to write him a letter. The other thing that was a real kick in the nuts is the week that I got arrested, he was getting out of prison. It was just like, I literally thought about it at the time as like, I'm continuing the family tradition, because there is intergenerational trauma in my family. And I definitely believe it's related to, like, on my mom's side of the family, the Sanchez family, they were indigenous to Texas, and some of them came from Mexico 3 generations back. On the Broze side of the family, we're Czech, and there's also some native. And both sides of the family have drugs and alcohol abuse, have people going to prison, have suicide, like at least the 3 generations back that I know of, you know. So there's something intergenerational there, and we all experience this in different ways. But it really felt like I was continuing this tradition that had been laid before me, and I saw this, of course, as an opportunity to break that. I decided to write my father a letter and just tell him, like, look, you don't know me. I don't really know you. This is who I am. This is what I've been up to. I was just super real with him about, yeah, I've been doing these drugs. I've been doing this. I was partying. I kind of went all crazy. And I don't remember exactly how I ended it, but I definitely got across the sentiment that, like, this is your fault, which on one hand is true. And I sent that letter to him, and he eventually got a letter back to me that was not at all what I was hoping, or I guess wanting at the time. And it essentially was, you need to take personal responsibility for your own actions. You're a grown man, which was also true. You know, it didn't feel good to hear that. And it wasn't like the apology or anything that he could have said that, and my bad, but he just kind of said, is like, figure your own shit out, dude. And yeah, so I was kind of like, yeah, okay, fuck this dude. I don't need to talk to him. And I continued on my healing way, and I didn't want anything to do with him. I started getting into activism 2009, 2010. You know, we're making the local news. We're doing big protests. Like, it was a high energy time. 2013, he gets released from prison, and he asked to be released to Houston, where I'm from. He's from Austin. He never lived in Houston, but he specifically asked to be released from prison in a halfway house in Houston because he said he wanted to be closer, or at least attempt to be closer, to myself, my brother, and my sister. My brother and sister were just having their first kids and had no interest in, you know, him coming in and out of their children's lives and creating trauma for them too. So they weren't open to it. I decided, as I was beginning my activist journey, and also, as I said, I'd started my spiritual journey in prison. And when I got out, I continued meditating. You know, I tried ayahuasca one time. I continued all the healing. I was doing the activist stuff, doing the healing work. And for me, it was like, I need to see this dude. I need this for myself, you know? So he told me where he was at, rode my bike across downtown Houston, went and met him up at this halfway house. We sat outside, talked for like an hour. And I was telling him, like, look, you don't know me, but this is who I am. This is what I'm doing. I'm starting to get into activism. I'm doing all these things. And this guy was extremely institutionalized. His name was Troy, by the way. He was very institutionalized after spending 30 to 40 years of his life in and out of prison institutions since he was like a teenager. You know, you could see it, and he didn't know how to deal with the fast pace of the world. And so he would just get locked up like that. So he didn't understand the internet. He barely understood computers. That just wasn't part of his paradigm. But I'm like, yeah, I'm posting things on Facebook and people are paying attention and things are happening. And he's like, cool. It seemed, you know, you could tell I was excited though, right? And he was like, it seems like you're doing something you care about. But most importantly, I took this opportunity to tell him, I forgive you. I want you to know that I forgive you. Everything happened for a reason. And at this time, he was in his late 40s, early 50s. And I was saying to him, I know that you want something else for your life, man. Like, you know, you can let go of whatever anger or pain you're holding on to from me. You need to talk to my brother and sister, but I'm telling you, I forgive you. I've let go of it. Everything turned out, you know, the way it's supposed to be. I'm at the beginning of some fucking cool adventure, and it has been a pretty cool adventure. And I just got to say that to him though, like say, like, this is, and it wasn't even about him really. It was like, I needed this, like I needed to let go of that. This is of course a lesson in how forgiveness can be very healing, not only for the other person if it's received, but for yourself. You know, I needed to tell him I forgive him, even if he never showed up again, even if he continued in and out of drugs, whatever it was, it really didn't matter. So I had that opportunity, and I was grateful to do that. Because unfortunately, in June 2018, he ended up dying of a drug overdose. He stayed out of prison that time from 2013 to 2018, and he just progressively started doing some of the same things. And the last time I saw him was April 2018, and he was staying at my granny's house. He went back to Austin, and my granny, like any mother, had given everything she could possibly do throughout my dad's life to try to help him. Vehicles, money, clothes, you know, whatever. Like she was just constantly, she just couldn't give up on her son. And so he was staying there. And I remember going in to see her, and her and I had a very close relationship. And as soon as I saw her, she's like, I can't take it. I caught him trying to steal the TV last night again. He disappeared. He lost his phone. He came back with some crazy story. He's using again. I know it. It's the same thing as always. And I was just like, Granny, I'm so sorry you're having to deal with this. I don't have a solution. And I remember leaving, and my father sitting outside her house on the driveway, just sitting on a chair, smoking a cigarette or something. And again, I kind of had this conversation with him, and it was this really weird but powerful role reversal where I kind of parented him for a moment, which is very different. And I was just like, you're 50s, you're in your early 50s. Like, you could still have a long life. This could just be some long, dark, fucked up chapter, and you could figure shit out. He was an electrician. I was like, you can get yourself an electrician job, find somebody that you care about. I know you don't want to live with your mom forever. You could get your life together and still live 30 more years. And this could just be some crazy shit you went through, and you still have this whole other beautiful chapter. And this was the only time in my life he didn't try to promise me anything. He looked up at me with tears in his eyes and said, I'm proud of you. And I, we hugged, and that was it. That was the last time I saw him. And a couple months later, June 2018, Miriam and I and Myra, we were on tour going around the U.S. I think we were in Michigan. And then I get a call from my sister, and we're at some camp out festival. I'm like, what's going on, Jessica? And she's like, he's dead. He's finally dead. We all kind of knew that something like this might happen one day, and eventually, I get to go see his body, and I said my amends. But I'm telling you, if I did not say that I forgive you, I would have felt so much worse at the time of his death. Of course, it hurt. I still had hope that maybe he was going to figure something out. Not because I needed a father in my life anymore. I've grown up. I figured out my own way. But the hope that he could be whatever it was that he wanted out of life, I don't know. I don't know what his favorite movie was, what his favorite color was, or if he ever aspired to do anything. I really don't know. And I don't know if he did. But I had hope for that. And unfortunately, it didn't come to pass. But his story and my going through my own story is largely why I said that I want addiction and talking about these things to become not only more normalized within our community, freedom communities, health community, conscious community, whatever, but also that I want to do something about this. I have an idea, and I don't have the full plan, resources, or really the time. So I'd love anybody who feels passionate about this to reach out to me, but to start something, not a nonprofit within their system, but maybe a private member association or something like that. It would be called the Derrick Broze Foundation, and it would help people who are dealing and struggling with drugs. Sorry, guys. I want to be able to help other people who have these same struggles and understand that there is another way around. I didn't write this book to boost my ego. I wrote this book as a prayer and a hope that maybe sharing my darkest depth could help somebody else, your family members, your friends, somebody else listening, prevent them from going in that direction and from being another number like my father or my good friend Alex or my other good friend Alex or my other good friend Tim. And to know that there is something on the other side. And I don't, have the perfect model or system for every person, but I think I have some ideas. And even one of those ideas is I'm trying to get together some funding. I want to ship this book, print 1,000 copies and get into every local prison, rehab center, wherever we can, to people who might gain value of it. If you know somebody in that situation, I'll send you a free one. I just want, if anything that I went through can be of, a use in that way and not just another story. Because in a way, as crazy as it sounds, writing this book on the 20th anniversary of my arrest is also a way for me to close that chapter. I'm more than just a felon, than a former drug addict, I want to work on these issues, but I don't want that to always be my story. I want to help other people who are going through that. And it will always be a part of me, of course, and it's nothing I'm ashamed of. But I've been telling this story now for so long that I'm ready to make it a new story, the story of how that my story is helping other people, whether through this Derrick Broze Foundation. And again, the reason that I think we need parallels is because for me, teaching people that you are diseased and you are always going to be that way is incredibly destructive. And again, that's my personal thoughts. It's okay if other people disagree. I have addict friends who disagree and say, look, I really truly feel like this is just who I am. I'm not going to judge or tell other people what to do. In my experience, I have seen and experienced how that can be a crutch, how it can be an excuse that people can use instead of addressing the deeper root causes of what might be causing them to act out or use drugs or drown when they're drinking, all that sort of stuff. There is something underneath it. I believe it. I've seen it. And I know that until we address that, we won't be able to heal humanity and then create that better world that we're after. So we got to get to the root causes. And I don't think telling somebody that you are diseased for the rest of your life is really the kind of mindset that we want to promote, at least not for me. And a big part of my work, as you guys know, is exit and build. Let's exit from systems and build better ones. Well, I want to exit from unhealthy mindsets and limiting beliefs. And to me, that's what is when you tell somebody you have a disease and you will have that disease for the rest of your life. Now, again, that doesn't mean there's not variations, because I'll be honest with you, I'm not sober. Like I smoke weed every now and then. I have a drink, here and there, but it's not a problem. It's been 20 years. I've been able to manage my things. And part of that is you see the same passion I put into my work. As much drugs as I used to do, now I just take that energy and I just bury it into all this stuff and do cool stuff with it. Like that's literally, I've had to learn how to navigate this. There was underlying reasons I was using drugs, but also I think maybe some of it could be personality, that I like to just go crazy, go extreme into things. So now I'm just an extreme anti-government person. It just works out. So I don't think that that's a helpful model. Another thing I will say is this term recovery, and maybe I'm being nitpicky here, but I do believe in conscious language. And that is a thing in terms of the words you say and the way you program yourself, right? We're all programming ourselves. They're trying to program us. You might as well be the one in control and program yourself with good, positive, empowering thoughts. And so to me, that idea that you're in recovery, what is recovery? It's something that happens after an accident, right? After you've been wounded. Oh, I'm recovering. And so if you just say for the rest of your life, I'm in recovery, like you're constantly wounded, you're constantly healing from something. And yes, again, there is healing to be done, but it just feels like you're setting yourself up for a trap of like just giving yourself a way out, a crutch, an excuse to make. That's at least just where I've found. And because I had to go to AA. I was mandated. I didn't like it, but I was mandated to be there throughout that period of going in and out of prison. I had to go to 2 AA meetings a week, 2 aftercare meetings a week, take random drug tests every day. And when I would go to these AA meetings, and of course there's meetings all around the world, so you may have had different experiences than what I'm about to describe, but this was my experience in numerous places, numerous cities, etc. Little house filled with smoke. Everybody's drinking a shitload of coffee. And we call that cross addiction. Now you're just smoking cigarettes all the time, or you're just chugging coffee down. And again, if it helps you from stopping shoot heroin, then great, but don't act like you got to the root. Don't act like you actually got to the root of what's going on. You've just traded one thing for another. And it's like trading war stories of the crazy messed up things you do. And I'm not saying shouldn't be a space for us to share, because obviously I'm sharing with you guys some of the things I went through. That can be very, very helpful to have a space where you feel like you can let go of some of your darkest things. But it just, for me, in my experience, it felt like commiserating. It just felt like sitting there and just focusing on how horrible you were or are or things are, and not any actual like treatment, as they like to call it. I was allegedly getting treatment when I was behind bars. I had to see a counselor once a month, and the rest of the time it was prison. I mean, but I learned later they get a lot of insurance money for that, for calling these kinds of places rehabs. And it's interesting because my journalistic instinct actually started back when I was in prison. I'll tell you guys this one real quick. I was a trustee, which meant that I had a little bit more, permissions and privileges from everybody. So I got to go sweep the floors in some places that the usual inmates didn't get to go. And one of them was like an administrative building, and I'm there with a couple other guys sweeping up, and there's this bulletin board on there, and it's like upcoming Christmas party, blah, blah, whatever. And I noticed this big thing that says warning. So I'm sweeping and I'm looking, and this freaking thing is warning that the water at this facility has 3 times the level of legally allowed arsenic in the water, and advises all the employees to be drinking bottled water and not to use any of it. This is the water we're drinking, making coffee with, showering in every day. I grabbed that thing, I like snuck it in my pocket, took it back to the cell and to the little dorm area, and every time you mail letters, they would basically open your envelope and check it all out. I was extra sneaky, so I was like, I'm gonna mail this home to my girlfriend. I'm gonna sue the hell out of this place when I get out. And so I like showed them my envelope, and then whoops, sorry, I dropped it and snuck in the thing. I was like, here you go, sealed. She got it, and I had big plans. Again, this was like way before I ever thought anything about activism journalism. But now looking back, I was like, that was that same instinct of like, somebody's doing some wrong here, and like this needs to get out there. Also, there might have been a hope for getting millions of dollars in the process, but unfortunately, she later lost the letter and nothing ever came of it. Like, so yeah. But my point is these places are not helpful. I don't think it's using this term recovery, that you're always in recovery, or telling people that addiction is a disease. It wasn't helpful for me. I think it reinforces the current paradigm. And the ideas that I think are better parallels or alternatives, they're not anything revolutionary, I would say, or brand new. I'm sure there exist so-called rehab facilities that try to incorporate these things, but the things that were most helpful for me, really it's two, because I consider prayer and meditation to be variations of the same thing. You know, the contemplation really is what it comes down to. But some incorporation of prayer and meditation into a healing process, and journaling, as simple as that sounds. Because I'm telling you, my mind already races all the time, but if you've been on a lot of drugs, and especially speed drugs, or really any of them, and your mind is scrambled, one of the best things you can do is try to get your thoughts out. Get them out of this chaos up here, down onto a piece of paper that you can then look at, try to understand, digest better, reflect on. I think if I could start this Troy Broze Foundation, it would be a place eventually, a program that we could help people, help them start to get to the root causes through various exercises, including journaling, including trying to develop a meditation practice for the reflection qualities. And, you know, the interesting thing, I think this could be one piece of it, not something we depend on, and this would be controversial again for some in this space, but psychedelic therapy, I think, can also be very valuable. And that's not to say it's a cure-all or anything like that, and that it doesn't come with its own set of potential, you know, things. But for anybody who's gone down that road in a safe setting with somebody that you can trust, and, you know, a therapist, but again, I don't want it to reinforce their system. So just qualified people who know how to be what we used to call a trip sitter. Anybody ever been a trip sitter? Watch somebody freaking out? Yeah. But being able to do that in a therapeutic context, you know, somebody, whether that's mushrooms or MDMA. And the thing is, there's science behind this. There is data back there showing the quality of people being able to have transformative experiences that lead to healing, whether that's through mushrooms, whether that's through MDMA. That's just one idea. The other interesting aspect of that is Bill Wilson, the guy who, one of the co-founders of AA, he was actually a huge believer in psychedelic therapy as well, as a way to help people heal from addictions. And it was pretty controversial, where a lot of the people in the original AA sort of community or forming sort of disowned him for it, because they were like, you know, stop telling people to take acid. We're trying to tell them not to do anything. But he found value in that too. So it's just another interesting tidbit. I think in some cases, if people think it's, you know, it's valuable, that could be incorporated into there. And then also, I will say, I don't think all of the 12 steps are horrible or bad or anything like that. It is good to make amends with people when you have the opportunity, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's overall, my issue is with that, teaching people that addiction is a disease. That's something that you're always going to be inflicted with for the rest of your life, because I was told that many times. I saw other people make excuses for themselves with that when they would make a mistake or they would relapse or whatever. It was just because, well, I have a disease. And again, I can't speak for everybody, but that sure feels like you're reinforcing something into your mind that isn't very helpful. So my goal and my hope is that we learn to create new forms of dealing with, whether it's addiction or other mental health issues. I'm not saying the freedom movement, the anarchist community, the conscious community needs to turn into a therapy home or anything, because not all of us have the time or the resources or the patience for that. But I would like this to make a bigger focus of my work, my activism, my journalism going forward. And I want to work with you guys on that. Anybody out there who does have interest in that, please do feel free to reach out to me. And like I said, I'd like to call this the Troy Broze Foundation. And my hope is that by naming after my father, what really came to mind is that I don't want his memory to just be that of another drug addict who didn't make it. You know, like I said, I don't really know him. And I've started to learn more since, you know, through family. I've gotten some old pictures of him I've never seen recently, and learning more and more because I didn't have that opportunity, you know, when he was here. And I want there to be more for his memory than just that. And I would like that memory to be that of somebody who did have his struggles and who did have his trauma, and unfortunately didn't make it to stay here with us on this planet, but that his name and his experience and his story and the way that it impacted me can then be used to help other people. That's what I'm proposing. I don't want my experience or his experience or the other intergenerational trauma that has existed in my family and other families out there to go on. I know we're not going to solve the problem, and that there will be other drug addicts and there will be other people who die of overdoses. And there's a whole another element to this that we don't need to get into today, but that's, of course, governments shipping and trafficking drugs themselves, right? I've thought about that later. That's actually one of the reasons I woke up, actually, just real briefly. When I got out and I was a felon, I was going to the library all the time, applying for jobs, trying to get a job and find an apartment. And I decided to read this book as I got sober and my mind was getting cleared up. I read this book called Cannabis, A History. Really great book. It's not drug propaganda either way, like not, yeah, cannabis is the best thing ever and not reefer madness. It was about the legal, sociological, and cultural impact of the cannabis plant. And it was the book that taught me that the first drug laws in America, the Harrison Act of 1914, was actually about driving out the hemp industry, and that the oil industry funded the whole thing. And then later learning that a lot of the other drug laws were related to black jazz musicians and Chinese migrant workers and Mexican migrant workers were coming to steal the white women after they were smoking all the reefer. There was propaganda and racism and money interest behind those laws. And when that light bulb went off, I was like, holy shit, I just got out of jail for drugs, and you're telling me there's this other side of the perspective. And then, of course, later learning what I said, that the CIA and other agencies have been caught being involved in drug trafficking. So it kind of gives you this whole other perspective of like, why did West Houston get flooded with crystal meth in 2005? Because I was not the only person using it. I thought about that later. I got my own conspiracies on it. But the point is, there's more to this story, right? There's reasons that people are getting sucked into these things. It's not just that we have trauma, but that it's widely available, that we have a culture that really glorifies drug use in different ways, and movies and pop culture and elsewhere, and alcohol and things like that. So it is a difficult battle that I don't know we will win in our lifetimes, because as long as humanity has those underlying issues, we will look for a way to escape it. We will look to self-medicate it. Many of you don't use drugs. Your drug of choice is the dopamine released by scrolling all day, because your brain is getting the exact same response. You're releasing that dopamine, you're getting that high. That's the same high that some of us drug addicts were chasing. So we have to think about that as well. All the different ways that we allow ourselves to self-medicate, to ignore, to bypass, and not feel. I think John mentioned this earlier about, finally like stopping and feeling whatever you're feeling inside there, and then trying to understand that, and not looking for drugs or sex or alcohol or the internet or Netflix or whatever to distract you from those things. So my hope is that by continuing to be more vocal, putting my story out there now, that we can help other people in and out of the freedom community who are struggling, and slowly, bit by bit, we can heal humanity and build that parallel world of the future. Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys.